In this episode, we start by focusing on one of the most human parts of privacy engineering, because data subject rights are where the promises of privacy become real for an individual person. A privacy program can sound impressive on paper, yet still fail if it cannot respond quickly and correctly when someone asks what data is held about them, wants it corrected, or asks for it to be deleted. The CDPSE exam treats these rights as operational capabilities, not just legal concepts, because real organizations must execute them through people, processes, and systems under deadlines. Speed matters because many rights frameworks include time expectations and because delays erode trust, but correctness matters even more because a fast, wrong response can expose someone else's data, deny someone their rights, or create new risk. Beginners sometimes assume this work is only for legal teams, yet the hardest parts are usually engineering and operations problems like finding data across systems and proving what was done. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain how rights requests flow from intake to fulfillment, how notifications fit into that life cycle, and how to keep performance reliable under pressure. A clear understanding of what data subject rights are helps you avoid the common beginner mistake of treating every request as the same kind of problem. Rights can include access to personal information, correction of inaccurate data, deletion in certain circumstances, restriction of processing, objection to certain uses, and in some contexts, portability of data in a usable format. Some regimes also emphasize the right to be informed, which connects directly to notifications and transparency, while others add rights related to automated decisions or profiling. The exam is not expecting you to recite a jurisdiction's full catalog, but it is expecting you to recognize that each right creates a different operational task, with different risks and different evidence needs. An access request is about collecting and presenting data safely and completely, while a deletion request is about removal and confirmation without breaking required retention rules. A correction request is about accuracy controls and downstream propagation, because fixing one database but leaving derived datasets unchanged can still harm the person. When you see rights as distinct workflows with distinct failure modes, you become ready to choose the right response steps in scenario questions. Speed and correctness are often in tension, and the exam rewards learners who understand how mature programs resolve that tension through design rather than through heroics. If an organization waits until requests arrive and then scrambles, it will either miss deadlines or make mistakes, especially when the request touches multiple systems or vendors. A mature approach builds a repeatable process that starts with clear intake channels and triage, continues with defined data discovery steps, includes verification and exception logic, and ends with controlled delivery and record keeping. Speed comes from preparation, such as current data inventories, mapped data flows, and predefined roles, while correctness comes from checks, such as identity verification, response review, and controlled release methods. Beginners sometimes think that being fast means skipping steps, but in rights handling, skipping steps is often how you disclose data to the wrong person, which is one of the most damaging outcomes. Mature programs become faster by standardizing, automating where appropriate at a high level, and reducing ambiguity, not by rushing. The exam is essentially testing whether you understand that reliable speed is built, not wished into existence. The intake stage looks simple, yet it is a common exam focus because it determines whether the organization can manage volume, prevent fraud, and track deadlines reliably. Requests must enter the organization through channels that are findable and consistent, such as a web form, a support pathway, or another defined method, and the organization must be able to recognize a request even if the person does not use perfect legal wording. A key early decision is categorizing the request, because the organization needs to understand whether the person is asking for access, deletion, correction, or something else, and misclassification can lead to wrong actions. Another early need is acknowledging receipt and setting expectations, because that supports transparency and reduces confusion, especially when fulfillment involves multiple steps. The exam often tests whether you can connect intake to documentation, because you must create a record with timestamps, the request type, and the identity verification status to prove the organization handled it properly. Intake is also where the organization captures the scope the person expects, such as which accounts or services are relevant. When intake is disciplined, Later steps become easier because the organization is not guessing what was requested or when the clock started. Identity verification is one of the most critical control points because it protects individuals from having their data disclosed to an imposter, while also protecting the organization from making irreversible changes like deleting the wrong person's information. Verification must be proportional to risk, meaning higher risk requests or more sensitive data generally require stronger confidence than low-risk requests. The exam may test this by describing a request arriving through an untrusted channel and asking what should happen next, where a correct response emphasizes verifying identity before releasing information. Verification also depends on what the organization already knows, such as whether the person is authenticated in an account, and what additional proof can reasonably be requested without creating new privacy harm. A beginner pitfall is thinking verification is a single step, but in practice it can involve confirming ownership of an account, validating contact methods, and checking for mismatched details that suggest fraud. Another pitfall is collecting excessive verification data, which can violate minimization principles and create a new dataset that itself becomes risky. Strong programs keep verification requirements clear, documented, and consistent so staff do not improvise and accidentally create unfair barriers or inconsistent treatment. When verification is handled well, speed improves because fewer requests are stalled by uncertainty and fewer mistakes force rework. Once a request is accepted and the requester is verified, the next challenge is scoping, because the organization must decide what systems, data categories, and processing activities are within the request's boundaries. This is where data inventory and data flow understanding become operational necessities rather than academic concepts. A request is rarely limited to one database, because personal information may exist in customer relationship systems, billing platforms, analytics datasets, support tools, identity logs, and vendor services. The exam expects you to recognize that scoping is not guesswork and should not depend on one employee's memory, because organizational change will break memory-based processes. Scoping often includes determining which identifiers can be used to locate the person's data, such as account IDs, email addresses, or device-related identifiers, while being careful not to confuse people with similar names or shared devices. Another important idea is that scoping must include derived and linked data where applicable, such as profiles or scores that relate to the person, because those can influence decisions about them. A common beginner misunderstanding is assuming that only data the person directly provided is in scope, but many systems generate additional data about behavior, preferences, and risk signals. When scoping is systematic, the organization can move quickly without missing key data sources. Data discovery is the engine room of rights fulfillment, and it is where speed depends heavily on preparation done long before any request arrives. Discovery means locating all relevant personal information across systems, understanding what it represents, and consolidating results in a controlled way. If the organization maintains current inventories, clear system ownership, and known data flow connections, discovery becomes a repeatable process rather than an emergency search. The exam may test discovery indirectly by asking what prerequisite makes rights handling reliable, where maintaining accurate data maps is often the correct foundation. Discovery is also where organizations must manage duplicates, because the same data can exist in multiple places, and the response must be coherent and complete rather than fragmented. Another complication is that some data is structured and easy to retrieve, while other data is embedded in free text fields, attachments, or logs, which requires careful consideration to avoid accidentally disclosing information about other individuals. Beginners often assume discovery is a simple database query problem, but the privacy risk is in the edges, such as backups, archived systems, and vendor-held data. A mature discovery process includes defined steps, checks, and documentation so the organization can show it made a reasonable effort to find data and can repeat the process consistently next time. Different rights lead to different fulfillment actions, and the exam expects you to understand those differences in operational terms rather than in abstract definitions. For access, the organization must provide the person with their data in a way that is understandable, complete, and secure, while excluding data that belongs to others or that is restricted by legitimate exceptions. For correction, The organization must update inaccurate data and consider downstream propagation, because if the corrected value is used in other systems or models, partial correction can keep causing harm. For deletion, the organization must remove data where it is permissible to do so and must also ensure that deletion is not undone by synchronization processes or later reimports. For restriction or objection, the organization may need to stop certain processing activities, which requires translating the request into processing flags and ensuring systems respect them. The exam often tests whether you can connect the right to the control mechanism, such as a suppression list for certain uses, while still maintaining proper documentation and oversight. A major beginner misunderstanding is treating deletion as erasing everything everywhere instantly, without considering legal retention requirements or technical constraints. But mature programs handle this with a documented approach that limits use, controls access, and manages retention exceptions carefully. When you can describe fulfillment actions as concrete system and process behaviors, you are thinking in the way the exam is designed to measure. Exceptions and conflicts are unavoidable in rights handling, and the exam rewards learners who manage them through defensible decision logic rather than through blanket denials or risky overfulfillment. A deletion request may conflict with a requirement to retain certain transaction records, employment records, or security logs for defined purposes, and a mature program must know when retention is required and how to limit use of retained data. An access request may need to exclude information that would reveal another person's data, and the organization must redact or withhold appropriately rather than dumping raw records. A correction request may conflict with the need to preserve an audit trail, so the organization might need to keep historical values while ensuring current use reflects corrected information. The key is that exceptions should be documented with rationale and applied consistently, because inconsistent exceptions can look unfair and can undermine trust. The exam may present tempting answers that recommend simply refusing requests whenever there is complexity, but strong answers usually involve honoring the request as much as possible, applying exceptions narrowly, and documenting the reasoning. Beginners sometimes fear exceptions because they feel like loopholes, but in privacy engineering they are part of responsible operations when they are governed and transparent. When exception handling is disciplined, the organization can be both compliant and practical. Vendor involvement is a major factor in whether rights handling is complete, because personal information often exists in third-party systems, and a response that ignores vendor-held data can be incomplete or misleading. This is why vendor contracts and oversight must include requirements to support rights requests, including timelines, cooperation duties, and evidence of completion. The exam often tests this integration by describing a vendor that processes data on behalf of the organization and asking what the organization must do to fulfill a request properly. A mature process includes a clear method for notifying the vendor, providing the identifiers needed to locate the person's data, and confirming that the vendor's actions were completed. It also includes handling subprocessors where relevant, because data may have been passed along to additional parties, and the organization must ensure obligations flow through the chain. Another important point is that vendor systems can contain data in forms that are hard to delete, like logs and backups, so the organization needs a realistic, documented approach that respects constraints while still limiting use and access. Beginners sometimes assume vendors will automatically handle requests because they are professionals, but the exam expects you to maintain accountability rather than outsource it. When vendor cooperation is built into the program, speed improves and correctness becomes easier to prove. Secure response delivery is a technical and operational control that can be overlooked, yet it is central to correctness because an access response delivered to the wrong place becomes a new privacy incident. Responses may include sensitive personal information, so delivery methods must ensure the data goes to the verified requester and remains protected in transit and at rest during fulfillment. The exam may test this by presenting options like sending data through insecure channels versus using controlled, authenticated delivery methods, where mature answers favor security-conscious handling. Secure delivery also includes limiting internal access to the assembled response, because assembling a response can create a temporary dataset that is highly concentrated and therefore risky. Another important aspect is clarity, because providing data in a confusing or incomplete way can undermine the purpose of the right. So responses should be organized and accompanied by explanations that help the person understand what they are receiving. A beginner pitfall is assuming that exporting raw system tables is acceptable, but raw exports often include internal fields, other individuals' data, or meaningless codes that create confusion and risk. A mature approach includes review steps, redaction where necessary, and quality checks before release. When secure delivery is treated as a control, rights fulfillment becomes safer and less error-prone. Notification fits into this domain because privacy programs must communicate with individuals not only in response to a request, but also when certain events occur that affect their information or their rights. Notification can be tied to incidents, changes in processing purposes, or other circumstances where transparency expectations require timely communication. The exam expects you to recognize that notification is not just a public relations activity, because it is a privacy control that helps individuals make informed decisions and protect themselves when risk increases. Effective notification depends on accurate understanding of what happened, what data is involved, and what actions the organization has taken, which connects back to evidence, scoping, and documentation. Another critical idea is that notification is time-sensitive, and the organization must be able to make decisions within required timelines, which is only possible if roles, escalation paths, and decision criteria are defined in advance. Beginners sometimes think notification should wait until every detail is known, but mature programs balance uncertainty with the need to provide timely, factual information and updates as investigation progresses. Notification also must be consistent with what the organization has previously told people about data handling, because inconsistent messaging can create confusion and mistrust. When you view notification as part of rights and transparency, you can see why it belongs in the same operational capability set. Record keeping and evidence are what make rights handling auditable and improvable, and the exam treats them as essential because they prove the organization acted responsibly. Every request should have a record that captures receipt time, request type, identity verification outcome, systems searched, actions taken, exceptions applied, and response delivery confirmation. These records support accountability because they allow the organization to show it met deadlines, followed procedure, and made defensible decisions when exceptions were required. Evidence also helps the organization learn, because patterns in records reveal where processes are slow, where data discovery is incomplete, or where staff misunderstand responsibilities. A common beginner mistake is to treat record keeping as an afterthought, but without records, the organization cannot prove compliance and cannot defend itself if a complaint arises. Another mistake is to record excessive personal information in the request log, which creates unnecessary exposure. So mature programs record what is needed for accountability while minimizing extra data. Record keeping must also be protected because request logs can themselves contain sensitive information about individuals and their concerns. When record keeping is disciplined, rights handling becomes more consistent and faster over time because the organization can refine procedures based on real performance. Metrics and continuous improvement turn rights handling from a fragile process into a dependable capability, and the exam often rewards thinking that goes beyond one-time compliance. Useful measures include time to acknowledge requests, time to verify identity, time to locate data across systems, time to complete fulfillment, and rates of errors or rework. These measures matter because they indicate whether the program can meet obligations reliably, not just occasionally. Continuous improvement also involves identifying which systems cause the most delays, which vendors respond slowly, and which request types lead to confusion, then improving data maps, procedures, and training accordingly. Another improvement lever is designing systems with rights readiness in mind, which includes structuring data storage so it can be located, updated, or deleted more predictably, and limiting unnecessary replication that makes fulfillment harder. Beginners sometimes assume rights handling is purely operational, but it is also a design driver, because systems built without consideration for rights create long-term friction and risk. Improvement should also address quality, such as ensuring responses are complete, redactions are correct, and communications are clear. When you treat rights handling as a measurable process, You are aligning with the exam's expectation that privacy engineering is about repeatable controls and evidence, not ad hoc effort. As we close, delivering data subject rights, requests, and notification with speed and correctness means building an end-to-end operational system that protects individuals while producing defensible outcomes under deadlines. Clear intake, accurate request categorization, and proportional identity verification establish a safe foundation so responses are delivered to the right person and irreversible actions are not misapplied. Systematic scoping and disciplined data discovery rely on current inventories and data flow understanding so the organization can locate personal information across internal systems and vendors without guessing. Fulfillment differs by right, requiring concrete actions for access, correction, deletion, restriction, and objection, along with careful exception handling that is narrow, consistent, and well-documented. Secure delivery and thoughtful communication prevent rights fulfillment from creating new privacy incidents, while notification practices extend transparency when events affect individuals' information and expectations. Strong record-keeping creates the evidence needed for audits, complaints, and continuous improvement, and metrics convert performance into actionable program enhancements. The CDPS e-exam rewards this capability because it demonstrates that privacy is not a set of abstract principles, but a reliable, human-facing system of accountability that works when people need it most.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.